We'll start with the usual shilling, like, comment, subscribe, share, rate, whatever. Now, let's get into the video. Elric of Melniboné is the grandfather of dark fantasy alongside Devilman. So we will honor him in the best possible pseudo-intellectual way we can do on this channel with a book summary. But it's not any Elric of Melniboné book that we will tackle. No, we'll be doing this as a graphic novel from 2013, The Ruby Throne. Written by Julien Blondel, with art and color done by Didier Poli, Robin Recht, and Jean Bastide. There's no better way to start this than with the opening pages that I will read to you, since I cannot explain them and do them proper justice. Melniboné, the Dragon Isle. With this impregnable fortress of ivory and obsidian, Imrir, the dreaming city, the capital of darkness, where cries of agony mix with the purest of songs. Melniboné, the birthplace of the most ruthless and the most decadent race in the history of the Young Kingdoms. An uninterrupted reign of 10,000 years. 10,000 years of magnificent offerings and conquests, all for the glory of chaos. 10,000 years of an empire that today may come to a sudden end. The Melnibonians. I remember a time when black swords armed your ancestors. This is what Melniboine used to be before you came, my love. Ariok, Xiombars, Mablodi, the greatest lords of chaos, whose favors were sought by the sorcerer kings of Imrir. There is not a demon and not an element that they could not invoke, not a creature they could not enslave. It was the most dazzling incarnation of chaos in the world, and it brought promise of eternal torment and ecstasy. The empire of sorcerer kings and dragon masters, the dreaming towers of Imrir and the ruby throne. Not a nation in the world with walls strong enough to withstand the onslaught of the harvester of souls, the empire of your ancestors, and the legacy of your father, Sadrik the 86th. The empire that you were born to destroy. Your legend and your name will be inscribed in our memories. The White Wolf, the Pawn of Gods, the Champion of Ariok, the assassin of our people. No man can equal your power. No woman is worthy of you. The most beautiful queens in the world would give anything to die at your hand, just like your mother did before them. The greatest rulers will fall at your feet, cursing your name, just like your father did. Elric, son of Sardrik, welcome to the world, last Emperor of Melniboné. Take advantage of these years without tenderness. Learn to savor the taste of blood. Learn vice and greed. Learn jealousy, treason, hatred, until you are ready to call for me, beg for me, curse me. Wait for me, my love, because soon we shall be reunited. The first image during these pages is quite a display, with naked women being tortured. It talks about how evil and decadent the Melnibonians are, or used to be, and the pages color the birth of Elric. The text itself is prophetic, knowing how the Elric saga is and how it ends. The panels help illustrate the kind of story you, the reader, are getting into. These two elements paint the story to come in such a way that if you don't like it from the beginning, I don't think there is a chance for you to like it ever. Now, we're gonna get into the story proper. And funny enough, it starts with Elric on the Ruby Throne, but not in the same position as the cover. From the angle presented, things look more distant, almost like it's not the same man. Next to him, we see a raven-haired woman, who inspired Yennefer later on, but that's besides the point. The text shows us that Irkun is very displeased with Elric, who is the current emperor. He doesn't see him as fit to rule the great nation of dragon riders and sorcerer kings. In truth, Elric is just a sink emperor, who is always surrounded by parchments and needs potions. One of Irkun's advisors blames the drinking, saying that while Elric isn't a conqueror, he should not doubt his cousin's power. Irkun gets angry at that and calls Elric an albino and a philosopher. And next comes this line that gives us some interesting world building. The glory of Melniboné has not been forged in the hushes of libraries, but in the blood, the terror, and the trampled souls of its enemies. In the past, the power of our name alone was enough to shake kingdoms and shatter empires. The name of Melniboné. His advisor tries to talk him out of what he's thinking right now, but the prince refuses that. When discussed, he remarks that the only thing they are good for now is drinking and entertaining, like common humans. He says all this while crushing the skull of a human and drinking the pouring blood. Irkun has gone tired of this courty life and wants to wake the place up and remind the gods of chaos that there are still Melnibones in the world. His advisor tries to stop him, but the prince is done with that. The few panels we have of this really convey the decadence that Melnibonians are living in. You could even call it their cultural zenith. A bloody meridian of sorts when it comes to pleasure and cruelty. Next, we go to Irkun, that stands in front of Elric and the woman and greets them. Here we learn that the raven-haired woman is Irkun's sister, Simoril, and Elric's cousin as well. This only enforces the decadence of the Melnibonians and shows their Habsburgian tendencies. The prince presents his gratitude to them and says he came to show his respect. Elric says they go straight to his heart. That's kind of funny. The emperor wants to know why the prince came, but he says he did so to show his regards to the emperor and his divine companion. But Simoril tells him that's enough. He isn't fooling anyone and asks him for what he wants. Through some nice pleasantries and charisma, he says that he wants what everyone else in the court wants, and that is the attention of the emperor. Then he turns and talks to the other people in the court, telling them it has been long since the Lords of Chaos came to them, and that Elric will grant them a magnificent gift by calling Ariok the first of their kind. In the comic, Irkun refers to him as the first of our kind, which implies a kinship of sorts with this Lord of Hell, Duke of Hell. I have to go a little bit meta here because it gets weird. But the elves of Melniboné are a humanoid race descended from dragons. And spoiler alert, I guess, to an age-old story, Ariok is a Duke of Hell that appears in many shapes and forms, from a morbidly obese fat man with a crown to monstrosities, because I don't know how to put it else. Okay, my presumption with the first of our kind message is that the Melnibonians consider Ariok part of their own race, either ascended or gifted a lordship of chaos. But you can ignore this because it's just me, rolling wheels and trying to find meaning and stuff. Simoril calls her brother crazy for wanting to disturb the Master of Swords, but the prince responds back with taunts that why shouldn't they, in fact? Is she afraid that Elric might fail, or that he is too weak to try? Irkun tries to argue that since he has become emperor, Elric has starved his people of the glory of war and blood, and that now he wants to starve them of chaos as well. Before this could continue, an elf named Divim Tavar interrupts them, a thing that makes Elric stand up from his throne. Divim tells Elric and the rest of the court that they had found spies in the city, and they are being interrogated by a man named Dr. Gist. Irkun is disgusted at such thought. Elric asks to be taken to the spies before they get turned to scrap, and tells his cousin to entertain the court in his absence. Elric and Divim walk and talk about the spies. To reach the capital of Melniboine, Emir, whatever, is quite an impossible task, because the island where the empire is laid is protected by a sea maze, one that not even the great armies could cross, without the help of the elements or fine sorcerers. But 3 spies managed to get in. Those spies are called barbarians from the south, from the kingdom of Dorel. Divim proposes betrayal as an option how they could get there, but Elric becomes exhausted and leans on a wall. Tavar asks him if he's alright, but Elric brushes him off, saying he's in need of Simuriel's care. I can't help but comment on how good the coloring on the pages look in this. It's quite a superb work. As we can see from this, Elric suffers from a disease that is draining him, besides the albinism that he suffers from. We'll get into that later. Elric reaches the workshop of Dr. Gist. The good doctor is grateful Elric came, saying how his visits are so rare. Elric doesn't welcome the doctor's pleasantries and asks him what he found out. The good doctor tells him that one of them was more talkative, but that the way they traversed the sea maze and the name of their leader has been erased by magic. What he did find out was that a giant fleet of mercenaries was coming for the city of Imirir. The spy didn't know the exact number, but they did know they were to arrive in 2 days. The panels for this one are quite interesting. Firstly is the way the doctor looks. That's a thing of nightmares, lacking in hands but with spider-like appendages on his back. The spies are held in the air by magic, I presume, and have their hands cut off in a way that makes them look like puppets with wiring sticking out. The doctor is torturing them by stabbing them with spider legs, and he wonders why Elric only sends him a card on Christmas. We now go to the War Council, where Irkun and Divim and another dude are discussing what they should do. The other dude suggests fighting on the sea, but Irkun wants to burn them and asks Divim how many dragons he has left. The answer is not that many, because the prince sent the last awoken ones against the Vilmirians, and none of the other dragons have the strength to fight, and won't have for months. The prince then asks to conjure the legions of Piarai, but Elric cuts their discussion, reprimanding him that his vanity cost them more than the enemies attacking them. He then makes the decision that they will fight at sea and crush them there, with sorcerers up in the air. While the council is going on, Elric is leaning against a pillar, and when the focus is on him, he looks to be in a terrible state. Irkun stands above Imirir and contemplates of the great enemies that have tried to conquer its obsidian structures and towers of chaos, and how they all failed. Even the Lords of Law did not try to take the capital. We get a shot of the city from above, from, I guess, Irkun's point of view, which looks kind of good. It's quite an impressive city and looks well. While reminiscing, the prince asks if they should tremble in front of barbarians now. A bald elf comes to the prince, and the prince asks him if everything is in order. The elf responds with yes. The barbarians raise their anchor and are on their way to the city. The same bald elf erased the memories of the spies, so no one will suspect the prince. Irkun decided that if the emperor refuses to lead them into battle, they will simply create an enemy to fight. The prince congratulates the elf for his good work and pushes him over the ledge. Remember how Elric is sick? We now see how he gets treated for his illness. He stands in a pool of water, naked, as Cimoril cuts the belly of an elf woman. She bleeds in the pool, but she isn't the only one. Blood flows from different corpses towards Elric. Cimoril is also naked for some strange reason. She chastises him that he shouldn't be so greedy, because he is consuming them faster than she can prepare them. Even saying that at this point he is getting closer to consuming more blood and souls than they ever offered to Ariok. Elric in this state looks like an addict in the panel where he asks for more souls. He says he needs them more than Ariok needs them, mentioning something interesting, that Lords of Chaos are not born with cursed blood. Two things about this. The elf that gets cut has an interesting face. Like the lights are on upstairs, but there's really nobody home. Or she could just look terrified. But seeing how she just stands there for Cimoril to cut her, I'm more inclined to say she was hypnotized or somehow induced into this thanks to Cimoril's preparations. Another interesting thing is how Elric refers that the Lords of Chaos are not born with cursed blood. Now, my initial thought when reading this is that he suffers from leukemia. But after looking up a little bit more, I found something interesting. Elric suffers from oculocutaneous albinism, which is commonly known as OCA, or the common form of albinism, the one that turns your skin, eyes, and hair white. This is something you can see in many mammals and even in crows. But my theory is that he suffers from the Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome, which is the basic albinism, OCA, that comes packaged with blood disorders, bruising issues, and lung, kidney, and bowel diseases. Or he might have leukemia. Or, might as well just be cursed blood since this is a fantasy story, and I'm just trying to be a narcissist to prove how smart I am to the 20 people that will watch this. Anyway, let's continue this comic. This scene continues with Cimoril asking what was in her brother's head to ask Elric of summoning Ariok. But Elric knows he did this to prove that he's a weak emperor, that he's not fit to rule. Because both of them know what Irikun really desires. She understands that, but she doesn't get Elric's wishes. Why would the Emperor allow him to challenge disrespect him publicly so many times? Elric says that this place would be empty if he punished everyone that doubted him. Plus, he appreciates that Irkun challenges him to his face, not behind his back like others. She warns him that her brother fears him, but will do anything for the throne. They flirt a little, and it's implied they have sex in the pool of blood. Jumping forward in time, Elric is being equipped with his armor for war, and Divim comes to him. Divim tells him the enemies will be here in a few hours, but Divim looks worried. Elric asks him what is wrong. The enemy is more numerous than they initially expected, but Divim doesn't see this as a problem for the victory of Melniboine. Divim is no seer, but he saw Elric falling into the abyss. Elric seems accepting of his fate, if destiny so wants of him. Elric now stands in front of Irkun, Divim, and the other elf from the council. The prince asks if he wants to grant him the honor to lead the fleet in his name, but Elric says he offers him the honor of fighting by his side on his flagship. Elric is going to lead the battle from the front. Then we get a call of war from Elric. Quench the flares. The sea maze mists hide our presence. Let our enemies come to us. Let the maze wear them out, and the cold numb them, until fear creeps into their ranks, until that fear becomes terror. Slowly, until it drives them mad. For the lords of the higher worlds, for the ruby throne, to me, Melniboné. The two sides clash thanks to some boarding actions. The barbarians go straight for Elric. Divim yells to protect the Emperor, but Elric retaliates by saying he can protect himself, as he cuts down a barbarian. Yirkun is happy to see Melniboine got its Emperor back, and Elric says he never left. The barbarians eventually withdraw, and Yirkun wants to chase them. But Elric doesn't do that. He summons from the depths the legions of Pirai, an undead legion of enemies that Melniboné had defeated in the waters before. Elric offers the barbarians as a gift for them, and they accept it. It's quite an interesting scene as the barbarians are overwhelmed with fear at the sight of the undeads. Yirkun is happy to see that, but that offering to Pirai took a lot from Elric, and now he is weakened. So he tells his cousin to finish the strugglers as he rests, and then he gets some time to think to himself. Cymoril, my strength fails me. My cursed blood is killing me. Of all my race, destiny chose to make me both the most powerful and the weakest. And then it put me on the throne so that everyone can see my struggle. Neither human nor demon. Is this what I am now? An abomination, condemned to kill in order to live off the blood of others? Help me, Cymoril. Give me the strength I need. I don't know anymore. Should I hold on to this wretched life, or let the oceans take me with it? As he is thinking, a barbarian comes from behind him, climbing with the help of a rope on the ship, and drags Elric by his cape into the water. His cousin comes to help Elric and cuts down the barbarian. Elric is hanging by the rope. His armor is dragging him down. He asks for the help of his cousin. Yirkun even extends his hand and wants to help him. And in a moment, he has a realization. As Elric falls into the water, he hears his cousin say that it was an honor to fight by his side. Divim comes and asks about the Emperor, but the prince tells him there was nothing he could do. Yirkun says this line, which is interesting and I really like the way it's worded. The ruby throne has been orphaned, which holds an interesting significance with the story of Elric, but that comes later on, way later on, not in this video. During the fight, Elric gets called demon twice. One time by the mercenary leader who refers to him as the White Demon, and another by the barbarian that dragged him. He gets referred there as a demon. And that is what we call world building, good world building. Because by this point in the graphic novel, you as the reader might share the same sentiment with regards to the Melnibonians. Anyway, the armada reaches the port, and everybody's looking at the Emperor's flagship. On it stands Yirkun, with his fists raised. The audience raise their fists in the air back, and Cymoril cries. This last scene is very well made, since the response to what is basically the king is dead, long live the king, is done in black and red. The silhouettes are in black, while the sky and Cymoril's tears are in red. A stylistic choice that, I will say without any semblance of regret, that is as good as the red dress in Schindler's List. Not as impactful, of course, but still very good. Back in the capital, Cymoril screams where is he, not referring to Elric, but her brother, calling him a mangy dog. Basically, she knows her brother screwed Elric over, while Yirkun plays innocent, and has the guards escort his sister out. Elric is falling to the bottom of the sea, but he gets saved by Strasha, the Lord of the Sea. Elric is grateful, but the Lord of the Sea leaves him with an interesting premonition? Prophecy? I guess truth works as well. Elric, son of Sardrik, ruler of Melniboné, we salute you. The ocean cannot let you die in this kingdom. Your life is precious to us, Elric. An ancient pact binds us, a promise made long ago to your family. Soon, you will grant our deepest wish. Soon, you will destroy the source of decay, the contaminants of our kingdoms. Soon, you will destroy Melniboné. Right under this part, we get another look at the decadence of Melniboné. A dude is burning alive, while some women are torturing another, while a couple is screwing in the back. But the debauchery continues as we go into the throne room, that might as well now be called the fornication room. Some elves are proclaiming Irkun as the new emperor, but he refuses for now. Important, for now, as he wants to pay tribute to Elric, his cousin, for 7 days and 7 nights with a wild dance of Melniboné. Then he would pick his wife. He wanted to name her, but before he could do that, Elric comes back and surprises everyone. Irkun tries to keep at the act that the emperor drowned and he saw it with his own eyes. He almost slips at some point and says, Elric is dead. I saw you drown. Of course, at the sight of Elric, everybody turns against the traitorous prince, and their loyalty stands with Elric, who accuses his cousin of wanting to murder him. Devim even has a knife to the throat of the false emperor, and tells him to just say when. Cyril wants Elric to kill her brother. But Elric says that even the slowest, most painful of deaths would be too sweet for him. So he offers his cousin the pleasure of feasting at his table one last time, because he would banish him from the city and condemn him to exile in the young kingdoms. Elric tells him, "You will lie at my feet like a human slave. You will eat the hearts of those who dared follow you and raise their swords against me." I like this part where he says, "You will lie at my feet like a human slave." Because remember what was the disgusting thing that Irkun had in the beginning, what he hated doing? Drinking and entertaining, like common humans. This is quite a nice serving of poetic justice, I might say, and it's fitting for a man like Irkun. Now, this next part happens in an interesting place. Cymeriel and Elric are in a place filled with crystals, giant crystals, and in those there are bodies, the bodies of the former rulers of their kind. Cymeriel judges that what Elric had done is quite bad, it's a bad decision. Elric disagrees, because there is no greater disgrace for her brother than exile. But Cymeriel isn't having it. She thinks Elric needs to send a message, one to everyone that would dare stand against the Emperor. Elric notes how she is quick to condemn her brother to death faster than he is his cousin. Interesting aspect we'll get into later on in the story. Standing in front of all their ancestors, traitors, cowards, people that have sold their lives, families, their emotions, and their souls just to receive power from the Lords of Chaos. Elric concludes that Irkun isn't the worst of them all. In fact, he's the most Melnibonian. Cymeriel says, "Sometimes I have the feeling that you are ashamed of your own blood." Elric stands in front of the crystal coffin of his father. He says nothing to his lover, to his wife, but says to his father, "What about you, father? Are you ashamed of your blood?" This really puts something into perspective, because by now a new reader can see that Elric is a little bit different from his own kind. While sure they are of the same race, Elric seems much more noble in a way. It's not all black, and this comes into play thanks to the grey morality that the original creator Michael Moorcock brought into the world of fantasy. And yeah, you can say that Game of Thrones has grey morality thanks to him. Funny enough, I think they're friends. An interesting aspect I want to bring up, remember Drizzle, the dark elf from D&D that was an outlier for the rest of his race, that he was not like them, he was different. Well, before Wizards of the Coast butchered D&D, he was exactly that. He was basically an Elric character, and it made a lot of sense. But this is an Elric story, not a D&D story, so we'll continue. I know your pain. I know the hunger that gnaws at your insatiable heart. Avenkar, come to me. You that feed on souls, you that feed on agony. I invite you to a feast that no other can offer you. Avenkar, devourer from the depths. It is me, Irkun, Prince of Melniboné. I open for you the gates of the dreaming city. I invite you to Imirir. Elric is announced by Divim that there are enemies in the city. They are under attack. Elric learns then that Irkun broke out of his cell thanks to making a pact with Avenkar. The Emperor gives orders for battle and realizes that he must find his wife because Irkun is surely going after her. He finds her pretty soon in the embrace of his cousin that had behind him some help in the form of Avenkar. Elric is curious how could he do this to his own people, but his cousin asks the people he banished him from, which, point taken I guess. He promises that he will take care of Cimoril, like she deserves, which of course infuriates Elric, and out loudly says Cimoril was right. He should have killed him when he had the chance. Then Elric goes for a strike and he starts fighting Avenkar. But he isn't able to fight the beast and gets put to the ground. There, Irkun taunts him that when he wants to, Elric's life is gone. But he has other plans for him. And he teleports away with Cimoril. Guardian of black swords, protector of my ancestors, with blood and souls I called you Ariok. Lord of the higher hell, Lord of the seven darks, let me serve you. Ariok, by the name of my father, by the blood of my ancestors, by the rings of the sorcerer kings of Imirir, I invoke you, Ariok. Ariok, I offer you this blood. I offer you these souls. Ariok. Elric. My dear Elric. My favorite among all Melnibonians. At last, you finally decided to summon me. But what a delicious mystery torments your mortal soul. You could have asked me for glory. You could have asked me for power. I would even consent to join you with one of my daughters, if that was your wish. And yet, you prostrate yourself at my feet. All in the name of love? Rise, Elric of Melniboné. You will never again kneel before me. We have so many things to accomplish together. And this has been the story of the Ruby Throne. It's a very nice and interesting way to set things up, and it's a good introduction into what I would say is modern Elric. And it works and it fits, and I can't really complain about it.
So bring up our hands, so bring up
we start Stormbringer with a demon coming in front of some Melnibonians, telling them he couldn't find trace of Cimuriel or Irkun. The elves don't take this too good, and the leader of the group whips the beast, telling his men to bring new emissaries, or else the Emperor will invite them at his table, and their heads will be the main course on a silver platter. We now go to Dr. Jest, that was helping give birth to a child. I wouldn't get too attached to this scene or the child in general. The leader of the previous group that we talked about comes to the good doctor and tells him they found nothing in the human lands, but they do plan to look for more tomorrow. Jess lashes at him. Fun fact, in this he looks way more terrifying than he did in the Ruby Throne. He also says that tomorrow isn't good enough. He tells the leader to give him some news by the day's end, or else he will scry his entrails for them. Which is quite a gruesome scene. Hey look, it's Elric in a pool of blood with 3 naked women next to him. I wonder how this will end. He looks depressed. He salutes Jess' courage to come in front of him empty-handed. The good doctor tells Elric that they couldn't find them and they don't really have news. They look through all the young kingdoms with demons, elementals, and sorcerers, but they are not there. Now they must look beyond them. Elric snaps and says he doesn't care where they are not and why the doctor failed him. He wants them found and alive, so he could grant Cimuriel the vengeance she deserves against her brother. Elric wants Irkun to suffer. He wants his head. At this point, Elric is furious, pushing the women aside, killing them somehow, and lashes at the doctor in front of him. He just calls him pathetic, just insults him, and says he will have his head. But during this whole tantrum, the doctor stands unmoving, even as Elric commands him to kneel, and is basically laying on him, since, Elric is kind of weak. Just telling the Emperor that he mustn't, he's too weak. This reinforces even more the idea that, he is weak, and without his cousin wife, he's effectively useless. So much so that even the subjects that respected him, they aren't afraid of him. Elric has a breakdown alone, and says even Ariok has forsaken him. Speak of the wolf, here comes Ariok, apologizing for being delayed. The Lord of Chaos was caught up with some delectable champions of law, which can mean a bunch of things. Elric begs him, and the Lord of Chaos tells him he knows that the blood of his ancestors was hardly a gift, and offers him his own blood to restore the Emperor's strength. Interesting scene. Ariok then realizes that Elric needs Cimuriel, not only because he loves her or for revenge, but because without her, what will he do? He would be too weak to rule properly. Ariok confirms she is alive. Elric asks for his help in finding her, but Ariok can't do much. There are some places that even he, a Lord of Chaos, can't appear without being summoned. And apparently, Irkun knows this. But still, Ariok decides to tell Elric where they are and help him reach them. Because, he cannot appear there without being summoned. Doesn't say he can't help somebody reach that place. Ariok then grants him a strange looking artifact. It's like a red fruit or something. On a cliff during a storm, we have Elric and Divim that comes riding to him. Tavar asks his emperor what is happening. The army is mobilizing, the battle barges are being loaded, and blood rituals are being made. Elric tells him they found Irkun. Of course, Divim says that such a mobilization force would look like an invasion. How would the young kingdoms perceive this? In the end, Elric doesn't care. The Master of Swords marches with them. He orders for his dragons to be awakened, or his dragon in this case. Divim advises against that. Elric isn't taking any of this and asks Divim if, after all his failures, he would have him wait one more day to save Cymriel. Divim reluctantly accepts the orders of his emperor, but still advises against going to war now. That's because the season of storm has started, and that would make passing the waters even harder than before, for sorcerers or dragon alike. Elric curses the elemental lords, but the King of Seas is quick to come in front of Elric, telling him that the elementals are concerned regarding his relation with Ariok. But they promised they would help him, and so they would do. As a new reader into Elric, this is telling you something you might have already guessed already. No deals are made that are in favors of those summoning the Lords of Chaos, and maybe not even the Elemental Lords. Divim takes with him 2 children, his children, while going down into a chasm, and that is the resting place of the dragons. Those children are his sons, I think I've mentioned this. He's taking them to show them how the dragons are awoken, and to prepare them for their future. For once, they will not be his sons, but his equals. He talks about how the dragons judge someone as worthy, and that is quite a gruesome process of melting skin, bone, and being eaten alive. But, despite the whole process of dying and torture, if they are accepted by the dragons, they would be reborn and become masters of them. He gives his sons an interesting explanation why he brought them here. And I really like this part. I know you are young, but should fate separate us, I wish to entrust you with the only creatures in this world whose hearts I can fathom without fear of losing myself. I like this one, it's quite poetic. While saying that last part, we get a panel of Elric holding his head in one hand and the artifact in another, looking exhausted. Maybe a sign of the blood of Ariok losing its effect, or maybe his own thoughts running wild in his head. Strasha, the Sea King, the King of Seas, calls for Elric and tells him that the seas promised to help, and so they did, by giving him a gigantic ship that could sail on both land and sea. Divim comes and, like everybody else there, is quite surprised at this miracle. With this gift, Elric grants the wish of Divim. The dragons are left to sleep, the ships are left in the port, and they will only leave with 50 men. The catch is, they will leave right now. On the gigantic ship, Divim is reluctant, as one should be when he faces such a gift. He isn't so sure about things around him. This ship, granted by Strasha, created by the elemental lords of sea and earth, has no steer. They don't know where they're going. But Elric reassures him that this ship doesn't sail the seas, but masters them, and that Strasha gave him the ability to control the ship with his mind. Divim is worried about the lack of weapons on the ship, not really made for sea combat, but Elric reassures him the elemental lords will not let anything happen to their ship. We get a panel where Elric is content, though as much as I applaud the drawing and coloring and these comic series, the picture of Elric here is weird. Nevertheless, nighttime falls, and Divim talks to Elric about how he is in high spirits right now, and it's been a while since he saw his emperor like that. Elric has all the reasons to be in a good mood. The king of the sea elementals guides him to his love. The master of swords is on his side, and he will have Yirkun at his feet. But Divim is worried about the prophecy that Strasha talked about. Now when I'm saying this is earlier on the cliff, Strasha mentions a prophecy of sorts. And that's talking about the destruction of Melniboné and basically his lover dying by his hands. Thing that got Devim worried. Of course, initially Elric thinks he's referring to the destruction of Melniboné. That's not it. What Devim is referring to is the death of Cimmeril at Elric's hands. Elric responds with this line: Devim Tavar, judge me not by the image of the man the mighty would make of me in their dreams. That future is not mine yet. Don't be fooled by this, because the very next page is a nightmare sequence where Elric sees Cimmeril bloodied. Here's something more interesting. She says the same lines from the beginning of the Ruby Throne. Elric, my love, summon me, call for me, curse me, for soon we shall be reunited. The image that accompanies these last two is quite an impactful one that follows the same style as the one from the Ruby Throne with the black silhouettes and the sky and tears being red. But it's more gruesome than that one that was more tragic for Cimmeril. Elric wakes up from this nightmare screaming Cimmeril's name. Devim comes to him and asks if he had nightmares. He had been calling for a name for quite a while. The other soldiers couldn't get sleep. Elric ignores that and asks how far from the shore are they. Everything went good, Devim answers, until a mist recently rised. And only Elric knows where they are going. But when Elric tries to control the ship, to steer it, the ship doesn't listen to him. And when he looks to the side, he sees that the ship is not sailing on water anymore. Elric deduces quickly, after catching some mud in his hand, because that's supposed to be seafoam, that the elemental lord of the earth is steering their ship now. Grom, the lord of the earth, wants his ship back, wanting to throw our heroes into the middle of the earth, a volcano, the molten core, whatever you want to call it. Elric tells him that they are the guests of Strasha, and that the ship was entrusted to them. But the earth replies he is not the king of the seas, and that they are not his guests. Elric still tries to talk to the king of the earth, and tell him they are not enemies. But the earth has no enemies. The earth gives, and the earth takes. The ship is turning to stone, though it was kind of already made of stone. It doesn't matter. Elric still tries to argue that he would kill his men for a ship? It's not really fitting. Grom doesn't kill. Grom balances. Earth for earth. A rock for a rock. The Melnibonians start falling to their doom. Devim, of course, manages to save Elric from falling into the opening of the earth. And Grom says something that I really like, and it's interesting, and seeing what happens to the ship kind of reflects it. He says that the seas lied. The seas always lie. Grom never lies. He promised nothing to Melniboné. That ship belongs to him. Elric and some of his men, of course not the full 50 of them, manage to escape, and he is pissed, telling the elemental lords to keep their false promises. For he serves only chaos now. Elric tells his men to start moving. Devim and some of the others ask of the wounded and the dead that need to be honored. But the Emperor tells them that those that wish to honor them can stay with them there. He cares not for their fates. The next scene, we have the Melnibonians going through a village, and it looks your typical depiction of a mud village, medieval, everything brown and grey, that you see in many generic fantasy works and so on. Things aren't looking that good in the village. There's a dog that barks at them. They kill the dog. They take some of the horses from there. I guess you can say they steal some horses. But that doesn't really make sense since the place looked abandoned. But they managed to ride on the horses. They are now in a forest. But I won't judge you if you thought it was a jungle. It's really drawn to look like that. Devim asks Elric if he is worried about the life of Cimmeril. But Elric knows his cousin will keep her alive until he gets what he wants from him. Devim presumes this is his life for hers. But Elric doesn't think so. If his cousin wanted him dead, he would be dead by now. He had ample opportunities. A boar comes running towards Elric, but he gets shot and insta-killed by arrows, which isn't the thing that happens with boars. They have thick hides and hair that makes it kinda hard to shoot them with regular modern bolts, let alone some weird arrows from there. Anyway, Elric says they now have dinner. Some kids in the trees say that is their boar. So of course Elric changes his mind and says that this isn't a mere dinner, but a feast. Oh boy. The next part you need to read for yourself because it's quite interesting, especially if you want to know more things relating to this. So let's begin. There's this human settlement that the kids were from that taken Elric and his men as guests. They feast upon that because Melnibonians like eating and the humans don't really get that much or at all. One of the kids that killed the boar dares to ask Elric, what are Melnibonians? He never heard of them. And this enrages the kid's father. Of course, Elric tries to play it to cool him down that it's a kid. And look how much has Melniboné fallen, that the mortals don't fear it anymore. And then we change scenery. They are now in the mountains, walking through snow. And if you're curious what happened with the humans, well, Devim asks and talks about the state of Melniboné in this case, because the humans don't fear them. And what Elric did was a good thing. For you see, the humans that had Elric and his men as guests had a quite tragic and gruesome fate. Imagine the same fate that the people that housed Guts and the Band of the Hawk while they were saving Griffith had once Wild came to them. Okay, not as gruesome, it's just head on spikes and dead bodies. Not what Wild was doing, but nevertheless, you get the idea. Some of Elric's men find marks in the snow that shows that this place was once a war zone between law and chaos, and the marks are from law. But Elric assures them that neither law nor chaos has been there in ages. Devim is really surprised at this point and asks Elric where he is taking them. And Elric only answers that to Irkun's grave. They reach the ruins of the city of Dozkam. Devim warns Elric that his cousin is too proud to hide, and also too cowardly to lay in wait alone. But of course, Elric cares not. He has come not for a duel, but for an execution. And Ariok marches with him. The Master of the Swords marches with him. Another interesting aspect here is that we get some exposition about the city. Apparently, it rivaled Melniboné in the splendor of perversion for the glory of chaos. Blood orgies and the rest, as you can imagine. So much so that Law brought golems and titans and champions to fight and destroy the city. And of course, the inhabitants that had humans and demons walking side by side and living side by side responded back in kind. But before a winner was declared, a freezing spell came over the city, and now the warriors are stuck in an endless struggle, petrified as statues, recreating their last moments alive and in battle. Now, of course, one of the Melnibonians asks who did the spell, And Elric doesn't really know. Most people don't really know what that is, but he makes a reference that it might have been balance itself, if such a thing even exists. This is a nice reference to balance here, and it will play an important part in the story later on. Devim is a little bit confused because apparently there is a city with the same name, but Elric tells him it was built centuries later, and in fact it's smaller and it's a fishing port, so it's not that grandiose as this one. And we get a demon attack, random demon attack. There's a bunch of them. Elric wants to fight, but Devim convinces him that this isn't his fight and tells him to save their queen. We get an awesome panel where Devim jumps towards a demon screaming for the Emperor. Now, if Games Workshop stole from Elric, I think Elric can steal from them. Something tells me Games Workshop stole this from Elric initially, the line for the Emperor. Whatever, let's continue. Irkun stands above a sleeping Cimmeril, promising to wake her from her slumber. Elric reaches him, and they exchange a few words. Mostly Elric telling his cousin that he will weep with joy when his queen dances on her brother's corpse, and if he really plans to fight Elric with a knife, then Elric will not weep for long. Of course, Irkun says he needs only a dagger to become emperor, to destroy Elric, and not even spill his blood. He stabs Cimmeril and calls for Arioch. Yeah, that's quite an interesting turn of events. Arioch comes and calls them both his favorite Melnibonians. Important to note that. The Chaos Lord is quite confused on who to pick. He can only grant one favor. But to who? Give back a life he took? Or a throne he vowed to defend? Which to pick, which to pick? He doesn't need to hear the pleas of the two mortals in front of him, because he already knows. But he offers them a solution. He gives them both one of his daughters, and wants them to kill each other, so there is only one winner. For Irkun, he gives him Mournblade. Yes, that's where Warcraft got the name from, and, well, the whole concept from. Now, if only they recognized it and didn't act like Witcher fans for it, it will be better. Nevertheless, let's continue. And he gives to Elric Stormbringer. Important, yeah, no, it's the name of the title. Awesome. The two have a nice but, quite frankly, short fight, and I wish it lasted more. Elric manages to overpower his cousin and puts him to the ground. And while he is preparing to strike, he hears his sword talking, telling him to kill his cousin and take his soul. But Elric refuses. Arioch gets pissed, so much so that he changes from his whitish complexion of a child to something more starly, more dark. And it's interesting. And asks Elric if he denies him. But Elric brings up an interesting thing. He promised to serve Arioch if he would help him. He is not bound to take the soul of his cousin. He is not bound to kill his own blood for nothing. He has defeated Irkun and Mournblade, I guess. And Elric is willing to keep his promise of serving Arioch, if Arioch is willing as well. Remember, Arioch right now is pissed. He's very angry at Elric, gives him some mean words. But he gives Cimmeril her life back. Still, during this whole process, he says that he did not give Elric a simple sword. He wed him to one of his daughters. He must love her and feed her. Whatever that means, the queen is back and alive, that's important. Elric leaves with her and his treacherous cousin. Of course, Cimmeril in his arms and Irkun in chains. On a ship back, Cimmeril lays next to Elric, trying to flirt with him. That She will solve his problems and use her cure on him once they get back, but until then, she has something else for the Emperor. Of course, Elric can hear the sword asking to be fed. And who does the sword want to eat? Cimmeril. Elric stands up, tells him to be left alone, and gets to leave. Cimmeril is scared, and Elric answers that he's scared for her as well, because it's not a good situation. Whew, that's interesting. The sword is really willing to feed on anything if it's given the chance. Going on top of the ship, he finds, you know what, he's the character that talked about the city at some point. Really makes a short appearance, but whatever. He finds this random character, and they exchange a few lines about the needs and wants of Melniboné and the things that an emperor must do. The random character says that he would give his life for his empire and his emperor. So Elric stabs him with Stormbreaker, feeding it. Nice. The next panels are the Great Triumph, coming back home with the traitor and the queen. And people are cheering loudly. They are in love with this spectacle and seeing the traitor brought to his heels. Whatever one you like. We got a panel showing Irkun suspended in air by chains. Elric on his throne with his queen. And of course, people happily welcome him back. But during these panels, we get a discussion between Elric and Stormbringer, where the sword tells Elric if he feeds her, she will feed him back. They will grow together in strength and power. As you can imagine, the sword really is hungering. Frostmourne hungers, right? Stormbringer hungers, that's a real problem. Nevertheless, once this is done, Irkun is brought in front of Elric and Cimmeril and the other nobles to make a spectacle of how punishing his fate will be. Of course, Cimmeril takes the lead and promises her brother the most gruesome ending, the most terrible thing. He will be sent as an example to all Melnibonians of what happens to those that defy and try to harm the Emperor. And his punishment lays in the hands of the Emperor he tried to usurp and betray. Elric tells her to stop, which comes as a shock, but you'll see why. Arioch granted him 2 favors that day. First, he saved the life of his queen and his love. Second, he wed him to one of his daughters, Stormbringers. So, he must keep his own promise to Arioch. And then, in a move that surprised everyone, Elric comes down from his throne and he crowns Irkun as the emperor and declares that he will exile himself to the young kingdoms. Should anyone try to come after him, the punishment is death. Cimmeril is going ballistic at this. She is upset, claiming that he leaves her in the hands of Irkun, her brother that tried to kill her. Elric, of course, tells her she has nothing to fear of Irkun anymore, but she isn't taking any of that. She's upset at the notion of leaving not only Melniboné, but also her, and, well, putting Irkun on the throne. There's a pretty interesting line I have to say here, where Cimmeril claims that if he leaves, he is no longer lover to her, no longer emperor, and no longer Melnibonian. Elric just leaves as Cimmeril screams in the background. And in the end, we get the same words we got from the Ruby Throne. Summon me, call for me, curse me, embrace me, my love, for we are reunited at last. Yes, those were the words of Stormbringer, the sword. I know. It's quite a magnificent tale. It progressed the story very well. I like the coloring in this one. I liked everything about it, to be honest. The fight scene against Irkun could have been longer, and I wish it was longer. It would have made sense to be longer. But we have to deal with what we have to deal, and this was good enough. It's another amazing part in an amazing story and the series that I wholeheartedly recommend you read and go through. You will not be disappointed with Stormbringer, especially not after Ruby Throne. The White Wolf. It has been 1 year since Elric gave up his throne and crown and abandoned his people. Since then, he lives to take others' lives. He's a mercenary, basically. A year has passed since he stopped being the Emperor of Melniboné, and since he became the one known to others as the White Wolf. Yeah, that's where they got it. This is how the first page of the White Wolf starts, on a ship with Elric thinking about his fate. As always, the art is beautiful. I really like the dark colors of this one, especially this one page. Superb. Elric jumps from the ship and goes to the shore, and he watches the ship go. And while he's doing this, he's thinking of Cimmeril, asking if she ever dreams. Then he thinks about the things he has done and seen since leaving Melniboné. Oh boy. An important note with this graphic novel series is that it's a retelling of the original story, but it's modified in certain aspects. So it will not follow the structure and the way the story goes in the books, and it will probably skip some elements from the books. And we can see this in the following page that makes a reference to something that I can't really explain it without tackling the book series and the story at large of the Elric saga. I can summarize it, but that would be an injustice to the series to just make up a few random words about it and be done with it. And I think it's better if we take what the graphic novel says for now and deal with the elements when I do a video on the book series or on the other comic books. Just note that the event that Elric is talking about, that he has seen and done, happens between Stormbringer and the White Wolf, and it's more explained in detail in the book series, and specifically in the book Sailor on the Sea of Fate. But we'll get there. We'll get there at some point. With that said, Elric mentions how he crossed the sea on a ship captained by a blind captain, how he made brothers in arms with people that knew about him. He even mentions how lonely he was and how he slept in stables, and wonders how long can one avoid his fate. He says this while standing atop a mountain overlooking some rivers. The previous pages were of Elric talking to Cimmeril, but this next one is him talking to Stormbringer. Elric bought a horse, of course, as one usually does, and says he knows what the sword is thinking. That it would have been better to just kill the person selling the horses and just take the horse. It just makes sense for Stormbringer. Why buy it when you can take it with killing? But Elric justifies that he is not there to put the young kingdoms to sword and blood, so he can't feed it whatever she thirsts. The sword mentions that it's not really about thirst, it's about the winter affecting Elric and him losing his power. And Stormbringer can help him with that. Anyway, Elric is on his horse on a forest, and the panel shows bandits, I'm just gonna call them bandits for now, running after a man. During those panels, Stormbringer mentions what I've said earlier about strengthening Elric and the fact that it's a good idea to feed the sword. Elric reaches the bandits and the man. The man got wounded by a spear, and he asks Elric for help. He begs him. The sword tries to have Elric kill everybody, but he doesn't. He just walks by. Elric refuses to kill them, saying he will not be made a carrion creature by the sword, and to let fate give him a challenge worthy not only of his name, but of the sword's thirst. He goes on to the forest and he reaches a group of slavers. Just to make the connections, those bandits were exactly slavers and that was a runaway that they were going after. So it's not bandits, it's a group of slavers, which is interesting and it's a normal thing in the Elric universe. The slavers were there with their slaves, horses, and their cages. One slave looks at Elric and yells at him that no man wields a sword like that without knowing how to use it. Then, as you probably expect, the slave asks Elric to buy his freedom, promising if he frees him, the slave would make Elric rich. A slaver punches him in the mouth. It usually happens. Anyway, but Elric asks for the price. He asks for the price of one soul, which is gonna be interesting. The slaver responds that it's 25 silvers for the body and he'll throw the soul in just for free. Why not? So Elric obliges him and gives the slaver a Melnibonian wheel, which is basically a gold coin with a dragon on it. A three-headed dragon. Remember Michael Moorcock and I think George R. R. Martin are kind of friends, and they have these little things, sendings to one another, or at least Martin has with Elric. Nevertheless, the slaver mentions how with that money he would give him his whole howe, every slave he has, and half his horses. Elric says he could buy the whole city the slaver wanted to sell them to, and a few villages near it. But he is satisfied with just these souls, starting with the slaver. Now the slaver doesn't take kind to that, because who would? It's a threat. And Elric kills him, taking his soul with Stormbringer. The final words of the man are basically him realizing that something's happening to his soul. And it's funny because it's in a world where normal people that don't really have connection to magic and stuff like that can't really feel that. But that guy felt it in his dying moments. The other slavers see his black sword and his pale skin, and they recognize him for who he really is. The White Wolf. Elric paid for all the souls, and, like a good car, he's getting all of them. Needless to say, no slaver was left alive in that camp. The slaves, though, weren't unharmed, and while they were shocked, they were kind of happy to be free and not be in chains and cages anymore. This is just a normal thing, you know how it is. The man that wanted his freedom presents himself as Smjorgan Ballhead. I really love his name, Smjorgan Ballhead, for obvious reasons. Count and Sea Lord of the Purple Town. Ballhead realizes that Elric is richer than him. There's no way Smjorgan can make him richer than he already is. And probably Elric is richer than Smjorgan will ever be in his whole life. So, whatever. Smjorgan is now indebted to Elric, and he decides to go with him. Elric tells him to get a horse because going on foot would be a bad idea, and Smjorgan obliges him. The last panel in this is pretty interesting because it shows the two men leaving the slavers' camp, the slaves coming out of their cages, and the final thing, the Melnibonian wheel in the snow, next to it, or in front of it, or behind it, the slaver whose soul Elric bought. Pretty nice panel. I really enjoy it. It has some nice symbolic connotations and meanings there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I really like this series, okay? If I haven't really said it until now, thanks to the videos I did on the Ruby Throne and Stormbringer, I love this series. At night, along the campfire, Smjorgan asks Elric why did he abandon his life? What made him go on this road of a traveler? Elric, of course, asks him back that the Purple Town Count just decided it's a good idea to become a slave. He laughs at it and he tells Elric that he left his home for the seas 10 years ago. He felt the calling of the blue water more appealing than whatever he had home. But a fight with a pirate fleet left him stranded, and he was eventually saved, I guess you can call it that, by the slaver that wanted to sell him earlier. The Sea Lord is then curious about why did Elric leave his home, asking if it's a woman, and immediately setting on the fact that it is a woman. That's the answer. Then he asks Elric her name. As he puts it, the name of woman we love warms us almost as well as good wine. Elric tells him her name is Cimmeril, and how he left not to find her, but to protect her. The Count, during this whole discussion, is making an effigy of sorts, just carving something, and Elric asks him what's that supposed to be. Smjorgen just blames it on an old sailor's superstition and tale that to protect them against bad spirits and all that. Elric reassures him that the bad spirits are dead, and they're not coming back. We jump on, and Smjorgen is sleeping. Elric stands above him with Stormbringer over his shoulder. Kind of a creepy move there, Elric, but it's gonna be creepy not because of Elric. That's the funny part. Things are never bad because of Elric, even when he does messed up stuff. It's never Elric. The sword is speaking to Elric, telling him to kill Smjorgen. Yes, Stormbringer has this tendency to want to eat a lot. It's a gluttonous sword, if you will. But Elric refuses. He promised Ariok's souls, not that he will kill anyone that appears in front of him, saying that fate doesn't put people in front of him for no good reason, and even mentioning that maybe Stormbringer was getting jealous and wanted to keep Elric only for herself. Surprisingly, next comes a white wolf, and he appears to Elric with a pendant in his mouth. Elric recognizes from the beginning that the wolf isn't a creature of the forest, and he knows it's an ethereal messenger, something not many sorcerers can do. In fact, it's quite high level when it comes in spell power. He asks the wolf who he is and what does he want. The wolf just leaves the pendant and goes off. He just disappears, walks off. Elric goes for the pendant, he looks at it, and we go to the next morning where Smjorgen has more information. You see, they're preparing to leave camp. The sailor recognizes the pendant as being from the kingdom of Jackor, saying that Elric has some pretty high up friends. But Elric says he never stepped foot into it. Of course, Smjorgen specifies more that it held the symbol of the Guild of Merchant Princes, more exactly. Again, Elric was never there. Didn't know any merchant prince at that point. But don't worry, Smjorgen was, and he had some favors to call in while they're in the city. They reach the city, and we get some little bit of exposition here, where Elric is asking his companion what he knows about the kingdom they are in. He says that the king, Darkmit, is known to be a solid strategist and a man of his word, with allies everywhere, especially since he has to deal with the countries of Pantang and the Daharjor Dogs of War. The most important aspect in this kingdom and the city is money. Money holds the most sway in the city. It's the coin for all. The kingdom and the city got rich thanks to trading ore they could extract, and they sold it to the windfolk of Mirchian, and they also trade with the city of spires over the ocean, so it's a good way of making money. The Merchants Guild is a powerful entity in the city. In a way, the king makes sure there's peace outside the city, and the merchants make sure there is peace inside of it. They find the festivities in the city, and something is strange about them. There are drums and sounds of music, but they are familiar to Elric. He knows them. Those are the songs of ritual sacrifice and blood. Elric mentions that this is strange because the whole city was under their lordship, technically lordship. They venerated the lords of law. But don't worry your pretty little head about that, because Smjorgen is here to give us all the juicy information about the city. While it is true that they pledged themselves the Lords of Law, the sister of the king, the princess, and her advisor from Pantang, a man with a giant snake around his neck, I think it's a boa, it's pretty interesting, extended their influence in the city. And with that, the worship of chaos. Now, it's not 100% dedicated to chaos or the chaos lords, but it is growing. There are still parts that are servants to law, but things seem to be changing around here. Elric notices, or Smjorgen also does that somehow, that they are being followed. Everything was nice and dandy. Unfortunately, Smjorgen only saw one. Elric was able to notice that they were followed by 5 men, or so he manages to count. They try to move away. Smjorgen asks if he will kill them, but he doesn't plan to kill them, at least not before finding out what they want. The men encircle Elric and Smjorgen, but the Melnibonian just says to take them to their master, and they kind of accept that willingly. So they take our heroes to a cave on a boat after walking a little bit on the city. It doesn't take long to reach the hidden palace of the merchants under the city. And, of course, as you can expect with such guests, one of the men wants to take Elric's sword, promising that he will get them back. Courtesy when you're doing diplomatic dealings. But Elric refuses, saying the sword remains next to him. Before the man can be more insistent about this, a red-headed woman named Vaslis interrupts him, telling him this is no way to treat an emperor and a count, especially such esteemed guests as they are. So of course, the man backs off, and Vaslis presents herself as the heiress to the merchant guild, and some other minor titles there. It's not important. She then tells 2 of her handmaidens to take the count to the bath, and they leave happily and giggling while Elric is taken by her so she can present him the private room and have a private discussion as well. There we found out that Melniboné is prepared to attack the city and the kingdom. The heiress wants to hire him for his services. Elric at first is displeased because does she really think her cousin will stop just because he's in a city? But it's not about the protection of the city, and it's not about protection in general. She doesn't want this place protected. She wants to leave, and she wants Elric to take her somewhere else. You're getting with this, right? They discussed a little how he's not really the kind to take princesses on long roads, and not really his thing. But she mentioned that Elric is a key to an ancient island lost in time and space, created by a great Melnibonian sorcerer named Saxif Dan, a name that Elric recognized. This person, Saxif, was also known as the champion of Mablod. And boy, his story is interesting. You see, Saxif was such a powerful sorcerer and Melnibonian. The Chaos Gods wanted his favor. They tried to convince him to just pick a god and serve them. And finally, the Chaos Lord, Mablod, offered him the following. It's kind of a desperation what he did, but you'll see it's getting better. This Chaos Lord offered him eternal life, the power to shape chaos forever, and defy time and the gods themselves. But here's the funny thing. The Chaos Lords don't give anything without a price. They always demand a sacrifice. And you see, his story is pretty interesting because he gave Mablod all the sacrifices he could But there was one sacrifice that Mablode wanted. One that would hurt Saxif. And that is of his human lover. The human he loved. He couldn't do it, so of course he did all the rituals and all the sacrifices, but he still didn't get what he wanted. And so, seeing this, his lover sacrificed herself so Saxif could get what he wanted. A bitter price to pay. Before getting his story, Elric is reluctant, but the way the story unfolds in the comic, this part about Saxif's history comes after this part. But just understand this, before I get the Saxif story I just told you earlier, we learned that, well, Elric is reluctant to take her anywhere. She then tells him that she wants to meet her lover, because her lover just decided to eat and exile himself somewhere on an island created by Saxif. Still, Elric isn't sold, but she tells him he and Elric, her lover and Elric, have one thing in common. They both exiled themselves for love. Then we get the Saxif story that we got earlier, and the story progresses. Elric accepts this, and we can tell that he does so because the first thing that we see on the next page is a bunch of seagulls. Under them, a ship. Under that, Vasili's naked and Elric leaving the room. On top, on the ship, Baldhild is steering it. There's a nice friendly interaction where Smjorgen says he almost believed Elric's story about undying love for Cimmeril, but Elric dismisses that as her being just a human, saying Smjorgen was pretty happy to take her handmaids and have fun with them. The interactions between these two are very nice, and I really think they are quite fitting. They work really well with the setting and the tone of the story, because it brings some elements to it, elements that make it more enjoyable, I would say. Now, don't get me wrong, the whole great dark fantasy thing here, amazing, can't complain about it. But they bring in something almost fun to it. Their interactions between Elric and Smjorgen is a friendly one, and it shows that Elric can care about other people, not only Cimmeril and himself, I guess. And it helps, in a way, lift the mood of the series, where we know and expect the worst to happen. Always. But let's go back to the story. Smjorgen says that, they've been at sea for like 4 days, and he knows this part of the sea like he knows his head. And there's an island there as much as there's hair on his head. As the name implies, there's nothing there. But Elric tells him that chaos portals are weird. They take strange shapes and different forms. Smjorgen doubts the heiress because, still, Portal Gate, there might be something she's hiding. Elric doesn't doubt that, but he knows for sure that she knows where she is taking them. Lightning comes out of Elric as the skies darkened and the sea becomes restless. The water also becomes red. He asks her what is happening because she also comes on the ship, and she reminds him he is a key. The Crimson Gate opens and the crew start holding to ropes so they won't get knocked over. Vasilis commands the portal to open and says that she is coming to be reunited with her lover. Remember, everybody was holding on to ropes? Well, Smjorgen tells Elric to just grab on a rope, and he doesn't, because he's kind of starstruck, he's stuck in place. And this is where the first part ends. To be continued. Quite a cliffhanger, I have to say. Anyway, we're not splitting these into more videos. We're jumping straight in part 2. Let's continue the story. Elric wakes up and he stares at a sun. Oh wait, there's 2 of them. He starts calling for his sword, but Stormbringer won't answer. The smell and the light are familiar to him. Vaslis screams impossible. Impossible. Melniboné. You didn't expect to get there, did you? Smjorgen tells her to stop screaming and asks Elric if it's true. Yes, but he can't feel the ruby throne or his dragon's heart. The air is heavier and there's no magic here. Elric says that she really thinks they are in Melniboné. But things aren't what they seem, and neither is she. Only enemies and slaves have seen Melniboné, and neither of those left of their own free will. Elric then points his sword at the woman, calls her a witch, and asks her what has she done, where does she bring them. The place they woke up into was a ship graveyard, a bunch of dead ships everywhere. And what did you know it? The souls of the damned came back to life to attack them. Elric calls for Stormbringer, but the sword isn't really answering. Then he goes on to call for Arioch. But as you can expect, nothing works. Arioch isn't responding to him. What can you do? The next part moves to a cavern of sorts, where a man asks who Elric is. He has defeated pirates, princes, sorcerers. But here, in front of him, is a Melnibonian. Elric presents himself as the son of Sardik, the 428, I think it was, ruler of Melniboné, and says he is the ruler of this person, of this man in front of him. But this man tells him that he's not his ruler. This man is his own king. Emperor, if you will. Yes, he is Saphix, the sorcerer we talked about earlier. They talk a little about how he recreated Melniboné, the Melniboné he lived in, and decides to show Elric the view of a city, of a throne that he never got to know. Important note, Elric is worried about Smjorgen and Vaslis, but the emperor, the old emperor, tells him they'll get there. They're waiting for them. And so, it's time to present the old Melniboné to Elric. There's a fresco there that's ancient even than something that they currently have now in Melniboné. So Elric didn't get to see it. It's a pretty interesting fresco that gives us a glimpse into the origins of Melnibonians. They were exiled from, and this is going to be hard to pronounce, Rin Kran A. And they discovered the Menstar and the Dragon Isles at the same time. But later on, they had to deal with a fratricidal war between the Menstrai and those who would later on become the Melnibonians. Saphix says that the books Elric has read when he was in his own kingdom lied. The original Melnibonians were purer than they ever were. Elric wants to crack a joke at Saphix using the word pure when he was the champion of Mablode. But the old emperor lashes at Elric to never speak that name again in front of him. You see, what happens next is interesting because Saphix uses magic to choke Elric and throws him against a wall, turning him into a ragdoll, if you wish. Asking if this is why he came, to spite him with that name, to have that air of confidence when he knows nothing, when he pronounces Rilin Krana so brokenly. Basically, he's also telling him that he knows nothing. But Saphix will teach him everything about his history. They start moving, well, Saphix does, he's just dragging Elric's body, which technically you can't really call it dragging because Elric was floating and choking at the same time and he was just following Saphix. Pretty interesting. He asks Elric if he can imagine the equilibrium their race lived in, if he knows what their race was before the Lords of Chaos corrupted them. Now he tells his tragic story about the sacrifice of his beloved, about how all sacrifices he made to the Chaos Lord were in vain. And they reach some sort of cavern, and there we have Smorgon and Vasilis. Smorgon was being killed by one of those damned souls as the two emperors reached them. Smorgon, of course, tried to break free, but that didn't work. The final panel of this page is quite interesting because while Smorgon is trying to break free, the last panel is just a picture of Vasilis on the floor. You know where this is going. Okay. Let's go back with this. The old emperor is kind of pissed. Elric begs him not to kill them, that there's no need for such a thing. But Sapphics brings up something interesting, that there is no need for anything. The Lords of Chaos want them to think they are on a chessboard, nothing but pawns. But what truly matters are their choices. Vasilis wakes up and comes close to Sapphics with nice words like, "I have finally found you. Your nice words were what I craved for all this time," trying to convince him she was his former lover. But he slaps her. I like how violent they get in this. It's pretty realistic. In the end, after some more words, she manages to convince him that she was Gratiasha, a former princess brought to Melniboné that the old emperor fell in love with. Somehow, while she died, he saw her die. Despite seeing her die, here she was in front of him. She says she didn't come here to be with him, but to set him free. She jumps into an abyss and Sapphics loses it, asking if he did not pay enough, if he didn't suffer enough. And stricken by grief, Sapphics destroys this imagined world, this gilded cage as he mentioned above. He destroys the world he created so he can finally rejoin his lover. Smorgon goes to Elric and tries to get him up, but Elric can't move. But Sapphics isn't that bad of a dude and teleports them out of his dimension that was collapsing, telling Elric that while he doesn't know the origin of his people, he has a lifetime to learn. The old emperor tells him to seek out and find them, the Rilin Krena. I will never be able to pronounce that right. The two men are sent from this dimension directly into the ocean. They are back in their world, but kinda drowning. Elric wakes up with Smorgon doing his merry thing on a ship, telling him that if he didn't wake up, he was about to feed him. Elric asks what happens, and his pal tells him how they got saved by a captain. Elric proposes that now Smorgon's debt is paid, and while the man would have been glad to get rid of that, he refuses, because in truth he was barely able to keep himself afloat in the water. It was the sword that saved Elric, the sword that lighted the water red. And there he came, Elric with his sword in hand, floating. They got lucky because they got saved by a good captain. He wants to meet the captain, Elric of course, wants to meet the captain and offer his gratitude. The captain was one named Duke Avan, and the Duke was quite pleased to see Elric there. He was quite happy to have him as a guest, in fact, telling that his ship is also Elric's ship and he will take him wherever he wants. That's how good of a guy Duke Avan was. Hell, he must be the only one not interested in the reward for his capture. And then, the surprise came. There's a reward for the capture of Elric. Apparently, Melniboné has put a price on the head of their former emperor. And they didn't only do that. They started to raid all the places that he was spotted in. Remember that kingdom, that city that we started at the beginning of this video, where we met Vasilis and everything? Yeah, well, that place is kinda screwed thanks to Melniboné. Probably that was the reason why they wanted to attack it to begin with. And guess what flew above the ships? Not rats with wings of the sea, seagulls, of course, but dragons with ruby spines. It ain't looking that good for him. Now we change perspectives to a Melnibonian ship where captain tells someone that they have no proof that Elric is still in Dakos, but that person tells him it doesn't really matter. Let the young kingdoms bring him to them, or perish with him in the flames. The same person calls Elric weak, saying that Ariok will favor a new Melnibonian, that someone else will wield the black sword, that Melniboné has a new emperor. It's not Irkun, it's Cimmeril. A quite interesting and unexpected turn of events, but what's more interesting is the way she looks. Now, I can't show you how she looks, because YouTube is censorious with this and whatever. But notice, she appears to be bald now, and has some sort of weird armor on her ribcage that kind of rotates and is like a boob holder, if you will. Cimmeril isn't the Emperor of Melniboné in the originals. This is a whole retelling of the story. That's not the original. As I've mentioned before, this is a retelling. It's gonna change elements and aspects while trying to stay as true to Elric's saga. But this is what we get out of it. And in a way, I find this whole change of perspectives and seeing Cimmeril as the emperor that wants Elric's head. Remember, she had a grave breakdown in the Ruby Throne. I find that this captures the irony and the self-fulfilling prophecy of the saga quite well. In fact, I think it captures it so well that we're reaching the point where it's becoming quite poetic. So in the end of this, I want to say that of course I liked it. I like all the Elric stuff I've done on this channel. But this one is interesting because it delves deeper into the mythos, into the universe, into the world building. You get aspects of it in Stormbringer and the Ruby Throne as well, don't get me wrong, you always get them. You get a plan of the bigger picture out there. But this one gives more insight, it gets to show you interactions with that world building. We learn a suffix and his built up world and dimension, and we get to see it because Elric goes there. We find out that Melniboné has a bounty on Elric's head, and we learn that the new emperor, or empress, isn't that keen on Elric, or not anymore, and she wants to have the power of Ariok and the black sword for herself. A very nice and contrasting way of telling the story and of putting things into perspective. It's really nice. I really enjoy it. Again, I always recommend that you read the stuff I do here. I have a bunch of fun doing it. And doing this whole Elric saga thing really made me appreciate comic books in a better way. Now, of course, some might say it's bande dessinée, bande dessinate, whatever, which is basically comic books. Sure, graphic novels, comic books, call them what you want. I really started to appreciate them more, the French thing. I am willing to say that Elric is a good starting point for both bande dessinée and graphic novels. It really hits a good spot in trying to tell an authentic story, a retelling if you wish, anyway, and it still is nice, with its coloring, with its dialogue, with everything in it. It reaches a point that very few, I think, in my opinion, can reach with this media. And that makes it amazing. Let's begin with Elric and the Dreaming City. Now this is such a nice story to experience. We start off with a cabin, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, where somebody is wondering how much do they have to wait. It's already been 2 days since the full moon was up. The largest fleet in the history of the Young Kingdoms was gathered, and they couldn't wait anymore. Not with the Melnibonian spies being everywhere, of course. We see the men talking our group of human kings. One of the kings wants to just launch the attack already and trust little of the man they were waiting for. Presuming he took the throne and is now planning their own demise. But our old friend Baldhead tells them he will come. Yes, they were waiting for Elric. Darkmeat, the king from the place of the last comic, the city that was turning slowly to chaos, starts talking, saying they don't doubt Baldhead, but they do doubt the man that only Baldhead has seen and spoken to. They are risking everything by attacking Melniboné. How can he be so sure Elric would keep his word? And so Baldhead speaks that he saw Elric defeat armies, pardon defeated foes, weep as he buried his dead, and resisted Ariok. He trusts the man that saved his life and that he saved the life of many times. He trusts the man that made him gather all of them here to defeat his own empire. Now, of course, we go back in time with Smjorgen and Elric talking about epitaphs, words to be known for. On a ship, of course, the Duke's ship from the last comic book. But Elric is troubled. He was too weak to live among his own kind, and too cruel to live among men. That chaos and destiny have made a plaything of him. You would understand why he is troubled. But nevertheless, Elric promises to write Smjorgen's epitaph, if he doesn't die first, that is. After saying that, he gets hit with his usual sickness. Smjorgen takes him to his room. Without Cimmeril, he is weak. And the other option, well, we know all too well how bloodthirsty it really is. During a new day, Duke Avan tells Elric he's fascinated by him. He gave his throne up, left his place of birth, and is now looking for the ancient home of his ancestors. Of course, any man would be curious to ask Elric why did he embark on such a strange journey after all. Elric tells him it's the feeling of living a lie. Like when you're fed soup and then you wake up and your throat is dry. But the Duke tells his side that his dreams are of pretty girls, treasures, and adventures. And while joining the side of an emperor to find his ancestral home is a nice honor and all, he hopes that the rumors about the treasures of Rin Kran Ah are true. Elric tells him to take everything he wants from there. He cares not for the treasure, but he fears the rumors of this place might also be true. Our adventurers reach a jungle on the sea and talk about the ruined city here, where the Melnibonians first came from. The Duke knows it from a traveler that said he had a map, but when he got close to the city, it disappeared in front of him. Elric says that honestly there's no map of the city, or else it would be in the library of Ymir. The Duke asks then how does he plan to guide them if he has no map. Elric answers that he has really no idea, but he hopes the city would find him. Smjorgen is bothered by some mosquitoes because remember this is a tropical zone, a jungle of sorts, and mosquitoes are kind enough to live in that place and torture people and everyone else that goes there. Elric tells him to just ignore them, just go on about with your day, since this is the kingdom of the insect king Nurik, and they wouldn't want to offend him. Remember what happened with the mountain, with Grom? Yeah, let's not get a repeat of that. Lizard creatures, or lizard men if you will, attack our merry group of adventurers, who are now on a tiny boat. They manage to kill 2 of Duke's men. When one gets close to Elric, he understands the lizardmen and what is spoke of. The lizard creatures were speaking his tongue. A swarm of insects come in and manage to either kill or make flee the lizardmen. Elric saved them. Elric, of course, thanks him, but asks why did he help them unrequested and with no offering? Are those lizards just his enemies? The Insect King replies that the swarm has no enemies, but he should ask the ocean. The ocean knows why. He promises Elric that the swarm will guide him to the ruined city. It will guide him to he who can no longer die. That's a pretty nice and interesting name. Let's see where this is going. The swarm keeps its promise and leads them to the city. And while they stand outside the city and they overlook it, there is a statue there, and the Duke asks if this child is somehow their god. But Elric recognizes the statue. It's not a child. That's Arioch. They walk to the city, and the Duke learns that the Chaos Lords aren't really gods, per se. They can't appear in the world without being summoned. A thing that we already know from 3 comic books, but of course, it's nice to have the Duke being the fish out of water here. Elric takes a look around. Compared to everything in the Dreaming City, here everything is so peaceful. The Duke asks if he isn't in the city he wanted. Like, is this the wrong one? But Elric replies that this is more than anything he has ever hoped for. Elric observes that there are no paintings, and the Duke and Smurgan kind of make the argument that it's an old city, things have passed, and colors don't live on forever. But the statues and the columns, well, they still stand, and they don't look to have aged one tiny bit, Elric argues. Even the vegetation of the jungle stops at the entrance of the city. One of the Duke's men, kind of the only one left, find an old creature. It looks more like Gollum, and it speaks Elric's tongue. Yes, Elric learns that the man is named Josul, and he is condemned to live. By his statues, Elric notices and kind of remarks that Josul is over 10,000 years old, which is a lot. Well, a huge lot. They follow the old man, and Elric tells his companions that the old man speaks a language that is almost similar to his, but it's an ancient form of his language, so many formulations, he just can't understand them. We learn that the lizardmen from earlier are lost ones, creatures with lost souls who formerly inhabited the city and are now doomed to live like that. Josul leads them to the library of the ruined city, the place exactly where Elric wanted to be, but we find out that every book and every parchment is blank. But they find the old man next to some murals that tell the whole story that Sapphics talked about. Weirdly enough, Smurgan forgot who that was. It just happens, when you get stuck into another being's dimensional world, you kind of forget his name. Oh wait, about that. Elric deduces that they are losing their memories and that it's magical. Something or someone wants them to forget everything. He realizes the truth. Arioch cursed the place to forget, erasing the past of the Melnibonians and the role he played in their downfall. So Elric gets Stormbringer and summons the Chaos Lord. But Stormbringer tells him Arioch won't come without souls, and Elric too is in need of them. Of course, Elric refuses to sacrifice the lives of his last companions. Stormbringer is an understanding sword and understands this, but it kind of understands the opposite. The sword thinks Elric lacks the strength, so of course, the sword will do it for him. Gladly. The sword kills Duke and his last man. One for Arioch and one for Elric. Elric tries to tell her that he has no right to do that, but the sword reminds him of the promise to nourish it. And of course, the sacrifice was made, so Arioch comes, chastising Elric for summoning him with just those measly souls. Especially in this place, he was getting bigger souls and more powerful souls in another dimension where they worshipped him as the god he is. But let's be honest, at this point, Elric is kind of done with his stuff. So Elric tells him he wants to know the truth. Everything. He can't handle the truth. Apparently, this ruined city was known as the City of the High Ones. You want to know why? Because this is where the Masters of Law and the Dukes of Chaos live together. And Arioch turned the Melnibonians away and led them through this path of chaos. Arioch says that he did that to protect them, to save them. It is really not his fault. He just randomly chose to venerate him. Then, of course, Arioch taunts Elric quite a lot, and he shows him the faces of all those he killed. One of those shown is the Dragon Master that helped Elric when he was an emperor in the Ruby Throne and Stormbringer. Funny enough how this series doesn't explain what happened with him, but those faces are the people that Elric killed or have died thanks to his actions, not only by his hand or his sword. Elric tells Arioch to stop, or else he will stop serving him and fight against him. Of course, Arioch is pissed that he almost kills Elric. He is so pissed that he transforms into this monstrous being with swords threatening all around Elric and promising to devour his soul. But our beloved Melnibonian gets saved by none other than Stormbringer, telling her father that the sword isn't really her daughter, his daughter. It's a weird relationship. And that the sword and Elric are now linked together. And, well, Arioch knows what Stormbringer really is at this point. And he can either choose to lose both Stormbringer and Elric, kill the both of them. So, Arioch kinda gives up a little and asks if Elric knows. Stormbringer says that Elric will find out about this when the time is right. Again, Arioch begrudgingly accepts and calls Elric a fool for his decision, telling him there will be nothing left of the ruined city once the Melnibonians burn it to the ground. In process of lifting the curse, the life of Josu is taken from him, because Josu exchanged immortality for memories, or vice versa. The curse is lifted, and Josu thanks Elric as he dies. Of course, Elric looks at the dead man on the ground, and he just keeps having this thing where he took the life of this man, and this man just thanked him for it. Well, immortality in such a place doesn't really seem like the best option out there, does it? That was part 1. But don't worry, we'll be doing part 2 exactly in this video because I don't like splitting these apart, because why would I? The second part starts with Elric lamenting over the graves of his lost comrades in Josu, saying he is not worthy of a grave or an epitaph, or you know what, anything. The most he really hopes for is to make amends for what he has done and the actions of his people. The last panel of the first page is a scene of Smjorgen saying that he will come. One of the Gathered Kings says that it has been 6 months since Smjorgen last seen Elric. There is no knowing if Elric turned traitor or if he is still alive. Speak of the devil, Elric comes into the tavern where the kings gathered and waited for him, telling them they will leave in 2 days. Also that he knows why the kings are there. They aren't there for him, but for their own interests. Same as him, in fact. Same for him, he only wants to see his empire burn to the ground. One king says that 2 days is enough to get discovered by Elric's kind. Elric says his kind is long dead, and do not worry about the ships. Strasha already forgot about them. We time skip a little and see Elric with Smjorgen on a ship that led an armada behind it. Quite a beautiful page. Now it's time to see the reaction of the Melnibonians. And, well, really, what did they act like when they found this news? Cimeriel seems excited and says she can't wait for their reunion. Elric guides the young kingdoms through the sea maze. They reach the port, where a bunch of Melnibonians awaited them and prepared, with armored units and ballistas. A huge and epic fight starts, and we only see a tiny part of it. Elric tells Smjorgen to take half the men and go to the southern gate and use any slave that can still bear a weapon. Elric had his own mission. He was not here to see the destruction of his empire, but save the only one that deserved it. Elric talks with Stormbringer about how empty the capital city is. It was known as the Dreaming City, but Elric presumes it's been a while since anybody else dreamt in this city. Melnibonians, to be more specific, because humans, they do still dream, but, they're slaves and get tortured and get experimented on, so you can imagine that it's not really that nice for them. Still, he made the mistake of underestimating Yrkun once, and he will not do it again. About that, but the sword tells him he senses a more familiar presence. In the throne room, Cimeriel greets him. She's playing a pipe organ, but the pipes are instead made of Melnibonians. Nice, right? She apologizes for greeting him so without a feast, or anything to be more precise, but she made the ceremony more intimate for them. Elric is surprised that Cimeriel could change so, but she says she grew up, understands what being Melnibonian means. Of course, Elric tries to tell her of everything he has learned about Arioch betraying them, damning them to chaos, about their origins, but she's not really moved by that. Mournblade appears, and so does Yrkun. Elric says he did not come to take his cousin's life, but he won't hesitate to do this. Again, he blames Yrkun for what is happening. All this time, he just thought Yrkun to be at fault for everything. But in the end, it was Cimeriel that wanted his head and hunted for him. That's even explained to us. Elric and Yrkun have a nice little duo, both of them wielding 2 blades from Arioch, Mournblade and Stormbringer, and Elric manages to win in the end, killing his cousin. Well, feeling bad for doing it, and saying that he was nothing but a pawn on Arioch's chessboard. Still, he tries to convince Cimeriel to come with him, leave, saying he is human enough for the both of them. Now, this is something funny, because before and during this whole interaction, Cimeriel refers to Elric as human, as in it's a bad thing to be human when you are Melnibonian. And it is kind of true, because we've known in this series that the Melnibonians are pretty messed up. Yeah, they're pretty messed up, and the dark elves from Warhammer Fantasy kind of want to be like them. Still, it's funny how she calls him a human, and, well, here is Elric embracing the idea of his humanity. This also has to do with what he found out in the ruined city of his ancestors, but this is not really delved upon in this whole retelling. So we're just gonna go with the lack of knowledge we have for now and move on. Cimmeril says she's too Melnibonian as she tries to grab Mournblade, and she gets stabbed by Stormbringer. That sword has no chill. Not even one, just goes for the kill whenever it wants. Elric goes to her and she finally confesses that she always loved him, also calling him the White Wolf in process. He burns her body. Stormbringer is, I guess, messing with him, taunting him about his destiny as he watches a great fight happen below. The fight where the humans seem to be winning. But as you watch the men he brought plunder the capital, he didn't seize it. The Melnibonians awakened the dragons. Elric tells Smurgen to take their men away, since the dragons are up, and of course they are pissed. The dragons burn fleeing men with green fire. If you think it's a funny concept that he uses green fire, remember Michael Moorcock and George R. R. Martin are friends. Elric and some of the men manage to get on their ships. Elric calls for the spirits of the wind to help him, and they push his vessels forwards, until at the exit of the maze, they're greeted by the giant warships of the Melnibonians, just prepared to strike at them. See, the spirit of the wind can carry them all. And to make matters worse, the ships were firing at them. Remember, Melnibonian warships are huge, and they are a big threat to any naval army that would ever dare come close to them. Excuse me. So, the situation isn't looking that great for our group of heroes. Remember, Elric is, alongside Devilman, the inventors of dark fantasy and grey morality. So, of course, something has to be done about this. The wind spirits say they can't carry them all, only one. So Elric decides for the wind spirit to take him and leave the rest. Of course, on one of the ships that gets destroyed by a dragon, there was Smurgen, who says goodbye to Elric and reminds him to keep his promise, the one about the epitaphs, as the dragons burn down the ship. Later, Elric and whatever men survived are free. They're still alive on the sea. I was about to say shore. They're still alive on the shore. The sea. You see, I messed up. Shores. I like shores. Anyway, Elric leaves the ship on a tiny boat. And there he throws Stormbringer away. But the water underneath his boat starts glowing red. Much in the same manner the water started glowing red when Stormbringer brought Elric up to the surface. During the whole suffix deal. And we are left with the last words of this book that resonate with the first one and all of them. Call me, reclaim me, look at me, my beloved, for here we are reunited at last, until the end of time. Oh boy. Overall, I have to say that this series is amazing. I like the retelling of this story, the coloring, the pages is amazing. The story needs a little bit of work. It jumps from places which might leave newer people in that are getting into the whole Elric saga a little bit confused on what's happening. Like, who are those people on the ships at the beginning of the White Wolf? What's the deal with the Dragon Master? Apparently he's dead. But don't worry. If you get into the Elric saga and you get more into the books and other comic books and so on, you will start to piece the story together and fill up those holes. Well, again, those holes could have been fixed up and expand the series. I think doing it in this 4th set makes sense, and it's a pretty good introduction. If you're gonna like Elric from this series, you will be willing to fill up those holes, because at the end of the day, what holes you do have aren't really important to the main story that's told at the end of the day. But still, it's an amazing piece of work from the first book to the last one. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.